Welcome to the Select Star Podcast, your resource for innovative technology, developer topics, and more. Here's your host, Margot McCabe from the HarperDB team.
All right, so we are live. So welcome everyone to the Select Star Podcast, your resource for innovative tech and developer topics. Thanks for tuning in. We have another exciting guest today, Zoe Knox, and I'm super excited to connect with you. I know you're busy and you're just kind of coming off of a vacation, so definitely appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
Hey, Margot, I'm really glad we were able to connect as well. I know it was a bit of a struggle to get the scheduling down, so thank you so much for having me on and working around all of the scheduling difficulties.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. So I guess a little bit about me to start. So I've been working in the software development field since, I guess, the late 90s now, kind of an old lady at this point. So I started out when I guess, broadband was just kind of becoming a big thing. And I have always been interested in the potential of, the internet as a connection tool and how it links people together from across the world. So I guess that was fairly formative for me, at the beginning of my career. And it's been a bit of a theme ever since. And maybe we get into that a little bit later when we talk about some of my kind of personal interests and other things. But there's definitely an intersection here with me between sort of technology and activism that I think has played a big role, and that informs a lot of the work I do, especially in open source, which is an area that I've been really passionate about. So. Professional background, I guess, I started working at an ISP in the late 90s and then kind of went through a series of development and development management roles in various companies, mostly in Canada. I'm based in Canada's capital, the city of Ottawa, so they've been mostly here. And I'm currently the head of engineering at the OpenNMS group.
Awesome. And do you mind, in case people aren't familiar, do you mind sharing a little bit about the OpenNMS group and what you guys
absolutely
do there?
Yeah, so the OpenNMS group is very cool, and I only discovered them a couple of years ago now. And I am very fortunate to have done that, in my view. So OpenNMS is the world's first fully open source enterprise network monitoring platform, which is quite a mouthful, and I can break that down a little bit. We say world's first because it was the first open source kind of enterprise focused network monitoring project. It's been on, I think it was on SourceForge first. It's been around since the end of 1999. So it's a very mature product at this point. We just keep extending it with new capabilities. And its focus really is networking equipment and network protocols. So as opposed to other network monitoring and server monitoring types of platforms, we really focus on getting deep into the interconnects and the networking and seeing the net flows and all that kind of cool stuff. So that's what OpenNMS does. Got some cool stuff happening right now with relating to moving some of that stuff into cloud services. So it's a very exciting time.
Okay, very cool. And so as VP of engineering, are you leading a team at the moment? What are you mainly focusing on right now, as we kind of, crazy to say it, but get close to the fourth quarter of the year?
Right? It's been crazy.
I know.
I feel like these years have both dragged and flown by in some ways, and it's really weird.
I know the time it's one of those things where sometimes the days drag, but then when you look at what month it is, it's like, what? Wait.
Right? I'm like, how is it
happened?
September?
Yeah.
It's nuts. It seems like it was just May.
I know.
So what am I doing? Well, my main focus right now, to be honest, is hiring, which has been a real struggle. We've been growing really rapidly over the last year and a half. Again, as we kind of ramp up to build out these cloud services that we're pivoting into. And I've been frantically building up engineering teams in a bunch of different areas. I think
Okay.
that is really the big struggle for, I think, everyone at this point, is hiring good talent and then keeping them, because there's just so many opportunities out there all of a sudden. So,
Yeah, I know that's interesting. We're actually hiring for a couple engineering roles at HarperDB as well. And it seems like all of a sudden, just over the past few weeks or month or so, I'm every single day I'm seeing people posting about open roles. And so I mean, it's good to see that, and good to see that companies are growing and are hiring, and people looking have a lot of options. But I agree. It seems like there's so many people looking right now.
oh, definitely. And I don't know, if it's changed too much in other places, but certainly like in Canada, we noticed a huge increase in demand for engineers. And I think it's because, they can work at all these different companies remotely now.
Right.
So it really has been difficult in some ways to hire folks.
Right. Yeah. Well, hey, that's good for anyone that's listening. Reach out to Zoe if you're looking for an engineering role. It's always
Absolutely,
good to
please
help
do.
spread the word. Very cool. And so yeah, I'd be curious to touch a little bit on what you mentioned earlier about kind of the intersection that you've worked in and operated in between activism and technology. I think I've followed you on Twitter. I've seen you posting definitely about interesting things over the past few months or so, interesting topics, bringing awareness to different things, which I think is one thing that's so great about social media. And I'm curious about how those things intersect for you. I think maybe some people see it separately. Some people probably see technology as kind of their professional life and an area they work in, and maybe activism as a separate movement. And I'm interested in kind of the intersection of those two things.
Sure. And I mean, it's complicated, so I might not do a great job of explaining it, but I
No
guess,
worries.
but you can edit this, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
I guess at its core, I have always sort of believed in the idea that, technology will definitely change the world, but it can change the world in good ways. And,
Right.
this is an attitude, I guess, that people had sort of the middle of the last century and up until more recently. We all kind of thought, yeah, technology and science are great. They're going to improve our lives. They're going to change the world. And then more recently, we've kind of seen the dark side of technology a little bit. And I feel like some of the shine has maybe come off for some people, but we've seen like data breaches and ransomware attacks and like data collection at an unprecedented scale and some of that stuff. So there's definitely the dark side of it, but I still believe that it's fundamentally a force that can be used for good things. So where it intersects, I guess, with activism and sort of my personal passions is that I've always seen it as a tool that can connect groups of people that otherwise would never meet and never be connected. And it's amazing what kind of stuff can come out of that. A few years ago, we heard from a family that was living in Northern Europe, and one of them had just come out as transgender, and they were facing a fair bit of discrimination. We actually hosted them here in Canada in our house for a year while they tried to pursue a refugee claim, which unfortunately was ultimately not successful. But this is the kind of amazing connection that I don't think would ever have happened, without the internet and without technology to facilitate that sort of thing. And maybe that's not a great example since it didn't work out as well as it could have for them, but it's just the kind of stuff that really, I guess, gives me kind of hope that we can do some great things still.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting example and great way to look at it. I mean, you bring up a good point of people are definitely getting a little bit more cynical and maybe more nervous of the things that technology can do. And, people joke about like robots and all of this stuff. And, as with anything that grows and becomes more advanced and more popular, there's always going to be people that take advantage of it and hackers and things like that. But I still I agree with you that for the most part, I think it's still being used for good and just for general advancement of, health and way of life and things like that. And that's a really great point you bring up of just kind of the connectivity that we now have on a global scale, and the fact that you were able to connect with someone that had a very unique challenge and need, and able to at least house them, and I'm sure help them even if it didn't work out, that was out of your control. But there's cases like that where it's so interesting that people can reach out to all these different communities online and meet with people that are struggling with similar things that they're struggling with, and realize that they're not alone. I think while the virtual world is in some ways making social interaction stranger because we see all these kids constantly on their phone and everything, but in other ways, I think it's promoting interaction because it's connecting people, as you said. So I think that's a really cool example.
Yeah, it's an interesting time, I think, because it does connect all sorts of people in both, kind of in positive ways and in negative ways, right? Like I think
Right.
in some cases it has given small groups of people spread out across the world a voice, and that is great when it's people connecting with others who are like them that they probably would never meet in real life. But some of those groups have been less than desirable, right? And we've seen the effect of some of that stuff too.
Right.
I won't get political, I promise, but I think I
No
think there
worries.
has definitely been a dark side of putting together many spread out small voices, just as there's been a positive side. And
Right.
yeah, technology to me is not good or evil, it's just a tool. So how we use it is what matters.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And so do you also see, intersections of that in the open source world? I know you've been involved, you said, in different open source communities. And of course, now with your current role, what are your thoughts on just kind of open source versus not in those types of communities, and how you can also be using those types of technologies for good? Because I think that's another cool example of just collaboration and providing different tools, so many different tools out there for, you can pretty much find a plugin or resource or, connector for anything that you need now because of the open source community. And so I think that's another example of, I don't know if I would call it activism, but just another example of people coming together for kind of a greater good and providing resources for each other.
Totally. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the open source world in general. I think when I started my career, it was, Linux was getting popular, and it was, just before kind of the big .com boom around 2000. And I've learned so much, from open source in my role as a developer, that I really want to give back as much as I can in that as well. So that's partly why I was so excited to be able to go and work for a company that actually is doing open source. But yeah, there's great examples of projects that really bring out the best in people and have created some amazing things. The Linux kernel is one of them. Apache is a great example. I think Firefox is a great example. There's a lot of really cool projects out there that have really built the foundation of the world that we use every day, right? We wouldn't have half of the technology that we use and take for granted if these projects didn't exist.
Right.
And I think as far as it being good, I mean, again, technology, it's not good or bad, but
Yeah.
I really love the open source aspect because it is open. No one can ever take that code away from you, and you're not locked in to anything in particular. So there's a huge amount of power and freedom there, which I think sometimes is not appreciated as much as the $0 price tag that we all kind of look at, right, when we're talking
Right.
about open source. But fundamentally, it being open source means you can take it and modify it and do whatever you want to with it. And even if the project itself goes away, you are still there with your source code, and someone else can pick it up and keep going. So I've certainly been in situations where we've had proprietary software or cloud services or things like that have gone away. And,
Right.
then you're stuck, right? Because maybe you can get your data out of it. Maybe, maybe there's another service that's equivalent or that you can import it into, and maybe there isn't. And,
Right.
that's just a huge advantage in my view for code that's open and available to everyone.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good way to look at it. And that makes sense. And it's just it's so interesting to see the different ways that people do collaborate and work together on different types of open source projects. And I think just for the time that I've been in the tech community, and it's just really awesome to see, people supporting each other, posting comments, challenges, things like that, like just kind of working off of each other and posting their code and getting tips and things like that. I think open source is really a good driver of that and kind of tool for getting people to collaborate more than they maybe would in a different scenario. So I think those are interesting points. One thing I'm also curious about, just, I always like to ask people in a similar position as you that have a pretty well-established career, and as you said, have extensive experience, have been in the tech world for a while. Are there, looking back at your journey and different decisions you've made and kind of how you got to where you are today, do you have any sort of challenges that you've had to overcome, or tips for people that might be wanting to get to a similar position as you, or just kind of like pivotal points in your career, things like that? I think it's always interesting to hear people's personal journeys in that sense.
Sure, yeah. I think my journey has probably been a little bit atypical in a lot of ways. I don't think I followed a fairly traditional path in that sense.
That's okay.
And I certainly have bounced between like taking on management and leadership roles and then getting really sick of it and going back to doing coding for a while. And I think that's probably pretty relatable to a lot of people, but
yeah,
it's not typically the path that one takes to a VP level position. So I think I took this role because it was needed and it was offered to me, and I do have the skills for it, but it isn't necessarily something I wanted to take, I think is probably the bottom line. I think if you do want to take something like this, career planning is really important. Whether you believe in it or not, it is something that most executive leadership does believe in my experience, and it's something that they're going to be looking for, to see that you're serious about where you want to get to and that you have a plan to get there. So I think that's probably number one as far as tips that I can offer. And I think the other thing maybe that I'll just mention is it can be really fun. It can be, I really find it rewarding in a lot of ways, because I'm able to really help shape the organization and the organization's culture, and make sure that our workers get what they need and are empowered to do the best that they can, and that I'm supporting them, and there's a lot of really rewarding kind of big feels that come along with that. At the same time, though, it's definitely not an easy job. And I think if you're thinking about trying to move up to a level like this, you should really just be aware of that, and that it is not always a fun place to be.
Right.
It depends how you feel about spreadsheets and budgets.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think a lot of people probably, as you said, there's not, with most types of jobs and roles, there's not always such a linear path. And maybe people early in their dev career are thinking like, okay, I want to become senior developer, I want to become VP of engineering and just keep moving up. But that always doesn't have to be the way that it moves. I think people should really analyze, as you said, do they want to manage a team? Do they want to move out of actually doing coding and, up one step further than that and dealing with more logistics and spreadsheets and things? Or do they want to be more of an independent contributor? And so I think things like that are probably really important to analyze, because it's not always just about like moving straight up and getting a better title and things like that. There's so many different directions you can take. And especially now with so many options and people aren't as expected as much anymore to stay at one company for so long. So I think that there's a lot more opportunity to kind of find what really works and fits your skill set.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think, it's really important that companies have kind of a technical track and a management track because, I know that when I kind of got to the top of my engineering ladder at one company, I was kind of like, well, what now? Right.
Right.
And it's not like I don't like management. I mean, I do. As I said, it can be very rewarding, but, there are days for sure. I just want to hide in my IDE and work on my pet projects, right? Because it can be just a lot of headaches. And some people love management, and I think that that's awesome. But I think a lot of us kind of do it because we're okay at it, and somebody
Right.
has to do it, right? So, I guess just know yourself is probably my best advice. There's certainly nothing wrong with wanting to pursue a career where you make it all the way to the top, and it can be rewarding in a lot of different ways, both personally and financially and everything else. But you just understand what you're going for.
Right. Yeah, I know exactly. It's our CTO has joked before when I've chatted with him about his path, about how when our founders first created HarperDB, that he was kind of thrown into a management position and didn't enjoy it or didn't think he was good at it or wanted to do it, but just had to kind of figure it out on the fly because he was just the most qualified and someone had to do it. And I mean, now he's awesome at it, but it's exactly what you said. Sometimes people just want to put their head down and just, work on their own projects. And so it's definitely something for people to remember, that when you are managing even one person up to however big your team is, it's a whole different ballgame. So I think that's interesting. Speaking of your pet projects that you mentioned, are you working on any interesting personal projects or anything outside of, your main work right now?
I am actually, yeah. So I'm always kind of hacking on something. We have traditionally at work had this event called Dev Jam, which we haven't done in person, obviously, the last couple of years, but we normally do it in Minnesota, the University of Minnesota. And so we had a virtual one last year.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, it was pretty cool. We held it inside of a Minecraft server, so that was really fun. And was the first time a lot of people had even played the game, so it was kind of an adventure. So for that, I created this virtual network operations center inside the game, and we linked it up to some real world data sources. And then you could go to this particular spot in the game world and look around, and there were screens on the walls that were showing like real graphs with real data from our network and stuff like that. So that was a cool little project.
Wow, that sounds fun.
Yeah, it was really fun. I actually gave a talk at Grafana's Observability Con on that one. So if anyone's curious, you can go find that.
Very cool.
But more recently, I've been working on this open source, I don't want to say clone, but certainly operating system that's been heavily inspired by Apple's macOS. And it's called Arix. So that is where I'm spending a lot of my time right now. The idea behind it basically is to develop all of the same APIs and tooling and stuff, and make an open source operating system that's actually Mac compatible in terms of being able to, build and run software that was written for the Mac. So that's where I'm currently doing a lot of interesting hacking, and it's really cool because it's touching all different areas. Everything from kind of like kernel and tool chain and low level kind of stuff like that, right up into, menus and desktop and application and packaging and literally kind of everything. So it's kind of the ultimate challenge, I guess, for me.
Yeah, it sounds like you have your hands full, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. There's no shortage of projects and work. That's for sure.
Right. How did you, get into that project or decide that that's something you wanted to work on? Is that something you've been you notice there's a need for and just have been wanting to do that for a while? Or I'm always curious about how people's kind of creative process works of what am I going to spend my precious time working on now?
Definitely. Yeah. So I've always really been fascinated by, the low level of computers, operating systems and hardware drivers and interfacing and stuff like that. And, I think that's because when I grew up, PCs were just kind of becoming a big thing. And,
Right.
when I learned to program, operating systems were pretty rudimentary. So I learned a lot about that kind of stuff, and it's always fascinated me. So this project actually really got started as a kind of because I can thing. We had a conversation, a friend and I had a conversation about Apple just moving away from Intel. They had just announced that shift at the time, and we were kind of joking around about giving our Intel MacBooks a longer life by building, an open source compatible operating system.
Okay.
So that was kind of the genesis of it. And also, I just feel like a lot of people have sort of tried to make something that looks a little bit like a Mac, KDE or GNOME or something. They kind of look Mac-like,
Right.
But under the covers, they're very different, and they're not nearly as, I guess, stitched together and usable and seamless. And kind of simultaneously, I love Apple, but some of the directions they've gone recently, not so great in my view. I don't want my laptop to be a tablet, I guess. Let's just say that. So I was really kind of interested in, could we actually make, something that is more or less compatible enough that I can run software that would be useful to me in my daily life, right? And feels as well engineered and, seamless and coherent as macOS does, but be fully open source and free and just out there. So that was kind of where it started, and it got, I think, posted on Hacker News not too long ago, which means everybody sort of got interested in it. So I was not ready for that, not at all. So it just kind of exploded, but now I actually have some people working on it with me, so it worked out well.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I was just going to ask, it sounds like a project where it'd be fun and probably super helpful to have some collaboration on it anyway. And it's obviously solving a challenge that other people are interested in and excited about. So that's really cool to hear about. And congrats on the Hacker News publishing. I'll have to go look that up.
Thank you.
I'm sometimes bad at keeping up. I love Hacker News. I know I follow them on different channels, but I'm sometimes bad at actually. There's so much info and so many different articles to read every day. I sometimes have a hard time.
That's exactly it.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're all swamped with information, so it's really hard to keep up.
I know, and then sometimes it's hard to differentiate between kind of like opinion pieces, and then, I mean, not necessarily difficult, but just sometimes people post something as if they're, proposing fact, but it's actually more of an opinion piece, even when it comes to technology. So that's been something I've been definitely trying to weed through of, you can't just believe it just because someone proposes this really believable argument with research. Actually go check the research and things like that. But that's a whole nother discussion.
That is a big can of worms, right?
I know.
But important topic.
I know.
I think it's a really good point to say, like, everything we see online looks very credible, right?
Right.
And not all of it is. So
I know. Well, it's like that with any information. I mean, I'm big into listening to podcasts, and my husband and I are expecting, we have a little boy due in about a month from now. And so and it's our first. And so I've been listening to so many parenting podcasts. My husband keeps being like, you can't just believe everything you hear just because there was one doctor on one podcast saying these really strong opinions. You have to also do research on the other side. And it's just kind of a funny reminder that I keep telling myself, because you hear one argument and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that. That with anything.
And first of all, congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. We actually have 4 kids, and they're all thankfully pretty much grown up at this point.
Oh, wow.
My youngest is almost 15.
Okay. Wow. So yeah, you're definitely out of the weeds. I mean, teenagers can be hard, but you're out of the weeds with at least the little kid challenges and diaper changes and things like that I'm
exactly.
a little nervous about.
I remember that stuff, and like we didn't there weren't podcasts really so much. There were blogs and lots of magazines and stuff, but like, all that conflicting information is out there, right? This is the best
Right.
way to parent. And then 6 months later is, no, this is the best way to parent.
I know.
So it's
I know.
kind of crazy.
I keep reminding myself how long people have been doing this throughout history, and that, generally it usually works out okay if you have good intentions. But I'm curious, having four pretty much grown kids, do they show an interest in getting into the tech world with kind of your background? Does that inspire them to follow a similar path? And, just because there's so much opportunity there now, or?
It's really interesting, actually. So when they were younger, they all kind of thought, this might be something they wanted to do. And I don't
Yeah.
know. As they got older, they discovered other interests. And so, no, I think like one of them had kind of planned to go into maybe game development.
Okay.
He's very creative, like he's a musician, an artist, and has a lot of passions that way. But he ended up just not doing it because he doesn't really have the interest in the computer science kind of side of it. So he was doing marketing, and then he's now looking at maybe going into environmental science. He's really passionate about that. So
cool.
Yeah, very different path. My other 18-year-old has just finished studying to be an audio engineer. So they're looking to get a job at a studio somewhere and help produce music. So yeah, they're definitely more on the creative side, I think, than the I'm going to write code all day.
Right. I mean, it makes sense. There's so many different types of engineering anyway, and I think it's probably, it's cool to have you as a resource there for that if they ever decide to change their mind. I mean, I see people constantly posting like, I'm in my 30s, I'm in my 40s, and I just decided to learn to code. But it's so fun to see people go through those stages of what their passions are and what they want to do, and what they want to study and try out for their first careers and everything. So I'm always curious about that. That sounds like you've got a good group on your hands.
I hope so. I mean, we've tried to just support them in whatever their interests were,
Right.
And no pressure, guys, no pressure. Just find something that you like that will mostly pay your bills and you don't hate it, right? So,
right.
It's fine. Like whatever they're into, good for them.
Yeah, I know. It's all you can hope for. You can't control it too much. I think my husband and I were just talking about that the other night, because he's in the ski industry and we're based in Colorado. And I was like, what if our kids don't like skiing? What's going to happen? And, we can't panic. You can't force that. I think the more you try to force passions on people, the more they go the other way. So as you said, just supporting them in whatever their passions are is probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, I'm certainly no expert at parenting, but I think they've turned out okay. So
yeah,
but definitely support and love, and just kind of letting them be their own people, I think, is important.
Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing, in my view, worse than trying to live a life of somebody that you're not, and that's just a recipe for misery. So I never wanted to force them into any particular box.
Yeah, well, that's really good advice. I like that. And I know I got us off on a little bit of a tangent here on parenting, but no, that's really interesting. I saw actually on your Twitter that you were a mom of four. So I think that's really cool to hear about. But bringing it back to kind of the tech talk a little bit, one thing I also think is always fun to ask chatting with people is if there's any other tools or technologies that you're really excited about right now. I mean, things that are, whether it's new frameworks or software that's recently come out, or that you've recently discovered, something that's making your life easier, just kind of like things that are on your radar over the past couple of months or that are coming out in the next few months. It's a really fun way for me to learn about different things that are happening, because as we said, there's so much going on.
Sure, let me think for a sec. I mean, there's always so much stuff out there. It's
I know.
hard to keep up with it, but so I guess actually one kind of trend that has been really exciting for me, and I wish I'd had more time to kind of get into this. I haven't been able to look at it as much as I'd like, but it's like decentralized and distributed systems that have been popping up. So I don't know if you've seen any of this stuff, but there's things like IPFS is like a distributed file system layer. There's a browser out there. It's called Beaker, I think, and it is basically a web browser that uses a decentralized protocol. There's a bunch of this stuff now that's happening, and it's all based on kind of like peer-to-peer networks and ad hoc, self-organized networks of nodes. So first of all, as a network person, like I'm really geeking out over all of that stuff, and the fact that these systems kind of come up and come together, sort of like, a BitTorrent network publishes these hashes and then everybody can find each other. So very similar, right? These systems come up and they're online, and then you can connect to them with these decentralized protocols. I find this stuff really fascinating because, right now our internet is built around these giant commercial carriers and hosting companies. And although there's nothing wrong with that, and hey, I love capitalism as much as the next person, originally the internet was meant to be very peer-to-peer, right? And that
Right.
everybody who was on it was equal in terms of being able to, publish and host and create and everything else. And I think what we've really seen in the past couple of decades is that, the model has become much more kind of producer consumer, almost like, cable TV or something was, in the sense that there's a group of companies that really produce the content and host the content, and the rest of us are just kind of consuming it. And these technologies kind of flip it back around on its head, to the point where every computer suddenly is an equal host on these decentralized networks, and nobody really has any central control over it.
Right.
So I just find that really, really interesting, and I think potentially really empowering, in a sense that you start to take the power away from these, large ISPs and commercial outfits that are running things today. So I don't know. I don't know where it's going to go, but it's definitely an interesting topic.
Yeah, no, I think it's funny that you bring that up, because that's definitely something that I've focused on and do research on a lot, kind of more on the database side of things, since that's obviously the world that we're in at HarperDB. But like my colleague recently wrote a really interesting article on the problem with centralized databases and how there's such bottlenecks with data storage when it comes to big, large data centers, and just kind of, just as you said, but just, in a different area, the kind of decentralization of databases and being able to distribute software to fix latency challenges and network insecurity and performance issues and things like that. So I think the overarching topic is definitely important right now, and I'm seeing people talking about it more and more. So when you brought that up, I was like, oh yeah, that's something I read about a lot right now. So
I bet it is.
Yeah, it's a good one to focus on. I think it's one of those sort of trends where having large centralized servers and other types of centralized software was working for a while, but it's not anymore. And so I think a lot of companies are realizing that they need to make a change in order to keep up with what the needs are. So it's interesting to see more and more people kind of talking about it.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And I think, we had a huge shift with, cloud over the past, 10 years or so, probably, right? From like big central servers into more like, containerized swarms, serverless functions, all this kind of stuff. And that stuff's really cool, but, it's still ultimately running in some big data center somewhere,
right?
Or a bunch of big data centers somewhere. And I find it really fascinating that, we're starting to see these kind of decentralized, no control type of protocols that you could run that kind of stuff on, and it'll just find a host and run and come back with the results. And that to me is just so interesting.
I know it is. It's really cool. The whole peer-to-peer architecture that I remember first reading about years ago is it's just really, it's so crazy what smart people can come up with to solve different challenges. It's I really admire being able to be surrounded by so many smart people and learn about all these different things that are happening. It's, as you said, it's people are doing good with technology, and it's cool to see the solutions that are popping up. Very cool. Well, hey, I know we're kind of coming up on our last few minutes. Is there, and this has been definitely interesting, and I love hearing about your unique journey, as you said, and kind of tips and things like that for people listening. And is there anything that you would want to leave us off with? I mean, not to put you on the spot or anything, but anything else you want to share, anything you're excited about that's coming, really anything at all. It's been super fun chatting, definitely.
Wow, I do feel a little on the spot.
I know, sorry.
I don't
like, what are your
think...
parting words?
Well, my parting words are, I'm terrible at being spontaneous and speaking on the spot. I don't actually think there's anything I can really leave you with, except I really appreciate the chance to chat with you today. I think it's been a great conversation, and hopefully your listeners will find it interesting, and that I don't come across like too much of a doofus.
No, not
which
at
I
all.
generally do. So.
No, and of course, and we'll include, in the description links to your social. Are there any other communities that you're involved in, or places where you post, or links that we should include where people can find you?
It's mostly Twitter, and they can find pretty much everything through there. I think I generally post links to my projects and stuff. GitHub, I guess, is the other big one. You can put
Cool. I'll be sure to include that link as well. Well, hey, thank you so much then for taking time to chat. It was really great to meet you, and hope you enjoy the weekend kind of coming off your vacation, and really appreciate your time, and we'll just be in touch.
Thank you so much, Margo. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Select Star, your resource for innovative technology and developer topics. You can find our episodes in all the usual places: Spotify, Apple, Google, RSS, and YouTube. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and share. You can learn more about HarperDB at harperdb.io.